Right, let's crack on. So, yeah, we're here to talk about e-bikes and e-scooters. Vanessa, could you go to the next slide, please? First up, first up, we're going to look at who Material Focus is, to a reminder for everybody, an introduction to this issue. We'll hand over to DEFRA, who asked us to coordinate this session for them. Questions to the group that we've brought together, and then Q&A, and then we'll close with a summary and next steps. Next slide, please. Who is Material Focus? Well, we are an independent not-for-profit. Our goal is saving valuable, critical and finite materials from going to waste by making it easier for everyone in the UK to fix, donate and recycle their electricals. And we do this through three main areas. We have an insight strand, which is where we go and find things out to help inform future decisions and future policy calls. We invest in making it easier for people to reuse and recycle. We funded over 60 projects that have made reuse and recycling of electricals easier for 10 million more people. And we hopefully inspire through our Recycle Your Electricals campaign, which is a mixture of direct, in-your-face sort of messaging through HypnoCat, but also talking about issues and landing coverage to raise the profile of reusing and recycling electricals. So things like Draw of Doom, vapes, and hidden battery fires. Next slide, please. And the next one. So what are we here for today? Basically, we've been talking to various people. You've been talking to each other, I'm sure. And it's pretty clear that there's a lot of uncertainty around the consumer challenges of buying, using, storing, and disposing of e-bike and e-scooter batteries. And we think it's probably commonly held that it needs to be made easier for people to do the right thing by them. If you hear that grumbling, that is my dog. It's not my tummy. I have had lunch. We want to better understand the challenges faced by the different stakeholders, many of whom that we've brought together today. So that's government, so fire services, retailers, both physical retailers and online retailers, producers, the recycling and waste sector as a whole, and local authorities are obviously a key stakeholder. Many members of the public look to them for advice. Next slide, please. So how big is this issue? Quite significant and growing. Around 146,000 bikes were sold, e-bikes were sold in the UK in 2024, now representing around 9% of the total bike market. In London, 16% of survey respondents reported owning or having access to an e-bike in their household in 2024. And bike sharing schemes, electric bikes accounted for almost 60% of all trips made, up from 45% the previous year. So definitely a big increasing market. Then we have, sorry, next slide. One of the key sort of areas of legislation around e-bikes and e-scooters is, of course, around the batteries that power them. And there are three different types of batteries currently as defined under UK regulation. You've got the automotive battery, and that's basically a battery used in to start or a vehicle, and now increasing electric vehicle batteries, which are much more integral to the actual motoring of that vehicle. You've then got industrial batteries, and these are batteries that are designed exclusively for industrial or professional uses, used as a source of propulsion in electric vehicles, unsealed but not automotive, sealed but not a portable battery. And this is where you can start to see where some of the confusion kicks in. Then you've got portable batteries, which must be sealed, weigh 4 kilos or below, not one of the other batteries, and not designed exclusively for industrial or professional use. Next slide. So what's important to recognize is that lots of e-bike and e-scooter batteries, if they're above 4 kilos, fall into the industrial battery definition as it currently stands. And as you've seen, bikes get bigger, or the motors get bigger and the batteries get bigger. We're seeing a lot of batteries that are sitting in that grey area around 4 kilos. Industrial battery producer obligations are quite different to portable battery obligations. So industrial battery producers are required to register with the LPSS, not with the environment agencies, within 28 days of first placing the batteries onto the UK market, and they must provide total tonnage, chemistry, brand name placed on the market by 31st of March the following year. There is encouragement for large producers of portable batteries should register with a battery compliance scheme, but there isn't a battery compliance system for industrial batteries. And this is all associated with the waste batteries and accumulators regulations of 2009. And here we're going to draw some parallels to what we've been seeing with vapes, is that the waste electrical regulations were written in such a way that they didn't comprehend that we would have a fast-moving consumer good in hundreds of its millions being that would have the WEEE regulations applied to it, but would be causing so many challenges because of how people are using them and disposing of them. And here you could argue the rise of e-bikes and e-scooters is posing similar or associated sort of questions, is that the regulations are not necessarily designed for the challenges that we currently face. Next slide. For industrial producers, for industrial battery producers, their obligations are to tell end users how they can return them through information on their website, and take back those batteries free of charge if they supply them with new batteries. So it's not necessarily the same idea around waste electricals and portable batteries, where consumers have various drop-off points through local authorities, through retailers, and in fact they're the things that we've been increasing and encouraging. On an industrial battery, strictly speaking, it's a relationship between the end user and the producer, and there is a like for like. So it's not really meeting the demands of what's sort of coming out of the system. Next slide. Here's a bit of like for like. So just to summarize, for portable batteries, retailers have responsibility for take back at end of life. They're less than 4 kilos in weight. There are some thresholds depending on how much you sell, whether you need to register as a large battery producer or not. Industrial batteries, the producer is responsible themselves for the take back of end of life batteries, typically heavier than 4 kilos, and all those batteries must go to an approved battery treatment operator or an approved battery exporter for treatment and recycling. So that's a bit of a whirlwind through the context. What we're going to do now is hand over to DEFRA, who will talk around why they're interested in this area and help frame the discussions we're going to have today.
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. And someone who's on camera, give me a thumbs up just to confirm. Yeah, thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. Many thanks to the team at Material Focus for bringing everybody together, and many thanks also to the large numbers of focus that have joined, which is really appreciated. So thank you to everybody. I'm James Butterworth. I'm the team leader for batteries and end-of-life vehicles in DEFRA. So my team looks after the regulations which Scott has just been describing. To give a little bit of background to this discussion, there's a lot of interest, as alluded to already, in e-bikes and e-scooters, not simply just to do with the batteries, but just because we're seeing more and more of them, and there's a whole range of aspects in the way that they're used and what they're being used for, their design, their prevalence on the roads, etc., that are I guess identifying them as an area that increasingly we're having to think about in government. The DEFRA angle specifically relates to what happens when these things get to end of life and a disposal route is sought. And so what we're particularly interested in is exploring further whether the end user, the end holder of e-bike or e-scooter batteries has what the disposal routes are available to them, whether that consumer can correctly dispose of the battery when they want to, whether the guidance that exists is adequate, whether it guides them to a disposal route that works, and whether that disposal route then means that battery moves off into a treatment route that's going to make sure that it gets recycled and that happens within the requirements of the regulations. As Scott has set out, the regulations are dated. They weren't brought into being in a time when personal mobility devices like this really existed, or even conceived of, I guess, to an extent. Things have changed a lot since then. The market's changed, and that's highlighted areas where the regulations aren't probably aren't as accurate and clear as they could be. And those definitions obviously play a part too. What we are most interested in is what more can be done in the shorter term to make sure that consumers have a disposal route that is clear and understood and that works. And in order to get to that point, I guess, and part of the purpose of today is to give everyone here the opportunity to surface their understanding, the challenges, maybe the opportunities too, that are things that we can address in more detail, perhaps in subsequent sessions following this one, to look at what changes could be made or what interventions might help to assure those disposal routes for consumers in the shorter term. So hoping that from today there's a lively discussion and lots of input. Team's going to be taking away the topics that are raised in order that they can be carried forward into further discussions, hopefully. And I'd encourage everyone, even beyond those that have got specific questions in advance, but please do use this as an opportunity to talk about your take on the issue of e-bikes and e-scooters and their batteries and what happens to them within your part of the overall system. That's about it. I'd also just finish by saying I'm sure there are many folks on the call who've encountered either me or my team before. Good to see those of you here again. Anyone who hasn't, please do treat this as an introduction, a contact point within the batteries team. We'd be glad to discuss things with you separately as well. So thanks all. Thanks Scott. Thanks Material Focus, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, thank you, James. I think my camera somehow has started working. I didn't do anything to make that happen, so that's a bit strange. So yes, we're going to move into the Q&A session. So just to sort of summarize again, we certainly from our side with the Recycle Your Electricals campaign, we're really focused on the consumer take on this, the knowledge and their understanding, because we're going to be asking them to do something. So we really need to make that clear as possible. We've brought a team of experts together. The issues are that there's a growing number of fires, there's general consumer confusion, unsafe batteries as well. So we've got colleagues who will talk about that, particularly in relation to online marketplaces. So we want to get greater clarity on the current situation. It may need some follow-up sessions. We might not get everything done today. And one of the things that we think might come out of this is we've done a series of industry briefing papers. You may have seen them for vapes, for example, for retailer take back. So that's the kind of output that we're liking to see. And that is then a working document. So we can then add to it as the situation changes as well. Right, let's move into the questions now. So the first one is for our colleagues. I'm not sure who's talking, whether it's the National Fire Chiefs Council or London Fire Brigade, but basically the fire services. Yeah, what stats do you have? What are the key challenges? What is the biggest concern, and how can we help as a broader sector?
Do you want me to come in now, Monica? I'm from the National Fire Chiefs Council.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Monica.
So I'm from the comms team in the National Fire Chiefs Council. Unfortunately, our policy team are unavailable, so I shall endeavour to do my best. Statistics have been a real problem within the fire sector. I don't know if my colleagues from London Fire Brigade are also on the call, but London, for example, has some good data. However, nationally, there is no good data at this stage in relation to e-bike and e-scooter fires. What we are aware of is we're seeing an increase in number, and London have been able to evidence that. At the moment, the data system does not specifically report on these fires. So there has been some published data where fire services have been able to put that in what we call the free text fields, but that's not robust data. There are changes to the way that fires are going to be recorded. Those changes are taking place this year. So those are reported into MHLCA, sorry, the Home Office. Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government was the Home Office, sorry. and we will see the rollout of that data next year, 2025, 2026 will give us the 2025 data. So at this stage, it's ad hoc. We are finding out from fire and rescue services very much from them what's happening on the ground, but NFCC don't directly collect or report that data. So that overall has been a challenge for us.
Okay, thanks. Darren, you're from the London Fire Brigade. Yeah, what's your thoughts on this issue?
Good afternoon. Yeah, as Monica has sort of explained quite well, so obviously across the country, the way incidents are recorded varies quite considerably. We're very fortunate in London Fire Brigade having a dedicated fire investigation team. We've got the resources to put into actually getting a bit more information and collecting a bit more data. To kind of put it in perspective, if you look at the number of e-bike fires that we've seen since we kind of started recognising this as a potential emerging issue back in 2017, 2018. In 2017, we saw 5 e-bike fires, so a really, really small number. Some of that may have been down to recording at the time because we weren't really recognising them. But then if we bring that up to date, last year we saw 178 e-bike fires. So that's a massive, massive increase. And actually yearly, since we've started looking at them and since this has become a bit of a trend, year on year, it's increased as an issue for us. E-scooters, however, have kind of leveled out a bit really. So we started off back in 2017, we saw 2 e-scooter fires. Last year we saw 30, and it's leveled out around the 30 mark each year of e-scooters. So that has definitely leveled out, but the e-bikes has just increased year on year as time's progressed. I think probably to talk about a bit more about the reasoning behind that comes into the next question when we get onto that and some of the issues we've faced. So I don't know if anyone's got anything more they want around the statistics side of it.
You're on mute, Scott.
You're on
Sorry,
mute,
Scott,
Scott.
you're on mute.
Sorry. It's one of those days. Sort of more off the cuff question. Do you see different types of, say, you've got a lot of higher e-bikes and e-scooters. Are they more robust in your experience than maybe sort of cheaper ones, less robust ones? Do you see a correlation between that and fires?
So the e-bike fires, the rental e-bikes, we have seen a few fires with them. However, generally when we see a problem with them, it's through people tampering with them. We've had a few issues with one of the companies where a number of their bikes, people have tried to steal the batteries off them. But overall, the build of those bikes, the quality is a lot better. They're a lot more substantial. And some of that is through some of the regulation that's been put, or control that's been put around allowing those schemes in the first place. And some of that has been through the work that we've done as a brigade with the organisations. We work very closely with them and we meet regularly with them. When you talk about, obviously some of the stuff will come on later on about the recycling of batteries or the recovery of them. So those rental organisations that are operating the e-bikes and e-scooters in London have actually put in place for us systems where if we have an incident with one of their vehicles where one of their batteries is involved, they'll come and recover that battery within an hour, which is really, really good and really responsible. So they've been really proactive in that. And yeah, as you asked, they are better quality and better build.
And what are the key challenges for the fire service? What does this mean on the ground, this increase in battery fires? I know it sort of sounds obvious, but maybe it's not as obvious as it seems. But yeah, what challenges are you really facing?
There's challenges across the whole area really. When you start looking at earlier, when you were talking through your quick presentation at the start, you talked about 4 areas. You said about buying, the usage, the storage and disposal. And that falls quite nicely into some of what we look at, because we see issues around the purchasing. Online marketplaces is a massive issue, to be quite honest, and the control of those and what they're selling. A lot of the e-bike fires that we see are through the conversion kits, where people are actually buying the kit to make their normal bike into an electric bike. Some of the problems with those is that you go and buy a kit and then you go and buy the battery separately. So straight away, you've got different components going together. A lot of those are then purchased. They're the cheaper products anyway, in the first place, being brought online. What we're also seeing around social media as well is a lot of stuff sold secondhand, which again, people don't know the history of it. You don't know how it's been treated. We're seeing a lot of the sort of cheaper products are going into some of the delivery riders, so the gig economy, where they don't earn a lot of money. They haven't got a lot of money to spend on an e-bike from a high street retailer, so they're looking for a cheap option. The other problem with that is that the way they use their bike, because it's being constantly used, charged, discharged, day in, day out, the lifespan of that product gets reduced. So whereas your average user using it as a leisure bike, using it for cycling to work or cycling at weekends, that lifespan of that battery is quite long, but they're reducing that because they're charging it. So you are actually reducing the not just the lifespan of that battery, but you're actually increasing the risk of it failing because you're constantly charging it and discharging it so much.
Yeah.
So the retail side of it is an issue for us. There's no doubt about that. And as much as we are obviously trying to educate people, it's very difficult. How do you say to someone, go and buy from a responsible high street retailer? How do you know that high street retailer is responsible and that they're actually supplying, reasonable products? It's very difficult to control. Usage, as I say, it's the gig economy is a big issue for us, particularly the delivery riders. We are doing quite well, I think, with the education aspect of that. The Charge Safe campaign has been really popular. We've been running a lot of events at fire stations and various other places, which is getting to these people and it is helping them. But then some of the issues they face when you talk about storage, you live in a high-rise block of flats. Where do you store and charge your bike? That's a big challenge. And as much as we try and explain to people, don't store it in your escape route, don't charge it in your escape route, and certainly don't, charge it at night. There's all these little bits, but it's very challenging for people. You're a delivery rider, you need your bike, you live in a flat, where are you going to keep it? When are you going to charge it? It's, these are all the sort of challenges that we face. And then I think disposal is a big area of challenge, not so much necessarily for us as a fire service, although it does throw challenges up, because we have the issue then so we've had a fire involving an e-bike that's in a flat or somewhere like that. What do we then do with that battery? Who do we give that responsibility to? Because ultimately for us, it would be responsibility to the responsible person, so the owner of it. But then what do they do with it? How do they safely dispose of it?
Yeah.
And that particularly if it's damaged, creates real problems. And I think disposal needs looking at anyway to make it more accessible for people to easily dispose of batteries. We do see a number of fires involving dust carts, involving waste recycling places, where unfortunately people are just disposing of lithium-ion batteries into their normal waste. So that in itself creates quite a big issue. Any questions around that?
No, okay. Monica, do you want to add to that?
I mean, there's additional, issues around the behaviour changes, as we've just briefly touched on. It's really difficult to get that behaviour change. And it's not just, for me, just the disposal aspect, but for example, if somebody knows they've got a damaged battery, they might see some swelling, there might be some leaking, actually, getting it to that disposal point and what they do in order to keep safe, knowing that they have a potentially explosive battery within their home, what do they do in order to mitigate that is a real challenge. Looking at various advice from various countries, I've seen everything from pop it in a bucket of salt water to put it in a plastic bag, but actually we don't have that consistent advice. That would really help, just for the public reassurance. What do they actually do before they get it to that right point of disposal in order to keep safe? Another challenge for the fire and rescue service is actually dealing with the actual fires as well. So, to say fires is probably the wrong word, as I'm sure my colleagues in LFP will attest to. These are explosions; they're fast. And really, the impact on firefighters in having to deal and put out these fires. There needs to be more information and research maybe on how they're actually dealt with and how they're adequately put out. The actual practices in order to keep firefighters safe and ensuring they're dealing with them quickly and effectively as well is a real challenge within the fire service.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. We did some work on hidden batteries last year, and there was a fire in Herne Hill, which was associated with a battery. And we partnered up with Imperial College and looked at the broader air pollutant impact of
Absolutely.
And of course, if you've got batteries randomly, the material where they are, that might be surrounding them when they go on fire can be a major factor in the levels of air pollution and damage as well. Great. Thanks, friends from the fire service. Thanks for that. We may have some more questions later. Hand over to somebody who's been doing a lot of work on this, is Electrical Safety First. So Giuseppe, are you there?
Take myself off mute. So I'm Giuseppe from Electrical Safety First. So we've heard quite a lot of talk about, lithium-ion batteries, and obviously this technology has been around for decades, and we haven't seen, the sort of fires that we're seeing now from e-bikes and e-scooters. Now, one of the reasons for that is the batteries in e-bikes and e-scooters are much larger than the batteries you find in your mobile phone or in your laptop. So that's the first issue that you have. And that's like a double-edged sword, because it's great that you can pack an enormous amount of energy into such a small space, because it means these batteries can now be used for, lots of things that, we would never have thought of using them for like 10, 20 years ago. They can be used for transport, they can be used as battery storage systems in houses. But with that comes the bigger risks of having all that amount of energy that's just sitting there. But it's important to say that, the technology has been around for a long time and it's not inherently unsafe. If you buy a manufactured e-bike from a reputable manufacturer and he's taken it, he's done all the proper safety testing, it's been through all the proper procedures, it's no less safe than, your laptop or your phone, which we've all got in front of us right now. We all carry around in our pockets all day long, and we do not see these products bursting into flames on a daily basis like we're seeing with e-bikes and e-scooters. So what we've got here is consumers believe, the consensus from consumers is that, when they buy a product, it's been through all the proper safety testing. They don't need to worry about making sure that, they buy from a reputable retailer, because, anyone they buy from should have been doing the checking for them. And these products should be safe from whichever source they buy them. However, as we've found, that is not the case. And if you buy an e-bike or an e-scooter from a third-party seller on an online marketplace, for example, quite often you find that these products haven't been anywhere near a test house. They haven't been through any safety testing. You'll find that they declare that the products are safe and available, and it damages the reputation of these products, which are actually good for the environment. It's good for people to, buy e-bikes and e-scooters. It like gives access you know, to many people who wouldn't be able to maybe ride a bike up hills and, you know, use these products in the past. And, you know, that's where we find some of the issues. The other issue is conversion kits, which are another challenge for consumers, because I think we've heard earlier from James, I think it was, or was it from Darren? I can't remember. From Darren, that these conversion kits, when you buy them, they're not complete conversion kits. So you might buy like the motor and the controller, but it doesn't come with the battery and the charger. And that's left up to the consumer to have to work out which battery and charger they need. And, you know, quite often it's quite difficult to work out which is the right one. And it's not helped by the fact that if you go to an online marketplace, you can buy a charger which is actually being sold. It's designed to fit any kind of battery with no regard for compatibility or the voltage of the battery that it's going to be charging. It just comes with a whole load of connectors that allow you to connect it to any type of battery. That's just a disaster waiting to happen. And when you have like a battery that isn't compatible with the charger, again, you know, we've actually done some tests, and although we see all these fires, when you actually go to do testing, it's actually very difficult to get a lithium-ion battery to fail and to go into thermal runaway. It's actually quite hard work. It doesn't look like that from all the statistics, but you know what you often find is the battery management systems, even in the lower value products, are actually quite good at stopping the battery from like overcharging and catching fire. The problem is that you get a single fault on that battery management system and you're charging it with the wrong charger, and that's where you get this chain reaction of items that can cause the battery to overcharge and then catch fire. Or you have a substandard battery management system that's more likely to fail because it hasn't been through the proper safety testing. And again, when you overcharge that and it's got a fault on it, that's when you start to see these sort of fires.
Okay, great. Thanks, Giuseppe. I'll just move on to the retailer side of things. As I said, we're going to have more Q&A later. And also, needless to say, thanks for everybody who's contributing today as well. So we unfortunately couldn't get anybody from a retailer here today. We actually turned this around at relatively short notice. But I just sort of want to reflect on what we're sort of hearing is that there's a sort of mixed bag in terms of how the experience for consumers are getting at different retailers. Some are taking them back sometimes, some are not taking them back at all. Certainly not front and center of any messaging from most retailers at the moment, not least because of all these challenges that we've talked about and will be talking about going forward today. We did a little sort of search on, many of you who search on Google will know that AI is now appearing before your search results, whether you like it or not. And if you and all expectations is that will actually make a big change in how people get information. So the old search engine optimization model might not be as effective as it used to be to get the right messages up the chain. And if you take a look, a colleague of mine took a look, and if you search recycle my e-bike battery, the AI result is to recycle an e-bike battery in London SW2. You can take it to Halfords, Lambeth Council, and you can also consider returning it to the manufacturer or seller. E-bike batteries are also accepted at Decathlon and Evans Cycle. So that's the message that people are getting. I suspect they will have a very mixed experience if they actually took their e-bike or e-scooter battery back to those locations. And also, we know that Lambeth Council, I think in their local magazine, have informed residents very recently definitely not to take e-bike batteries to their local council. Monica, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, that's interesting because, you know, I have seen, obviously, having looked at messaging that's out there, I did look, you know, I see a lot of messaging saying if you need to recycle your e-bike battery, contact your local authority. So I sadly did a lot of having a look at different local authorities to see if they had any advice, and I couldn't find any. And that, you know, from a fire point of view, was concerning, both from the point of view as actually what should we be telling the consumer to do, but also just whether local authorities are potentially aware of what lithium-ion on recycling the disposal of lithium-ion batteries could mean to them, knowing the challenges that many local authorities are facing at the moment.
Yeah, lucky enough, we've got somebody from local authorities on the list today. Thank you for that, Monica. And I think it just shows that what our consumers meant to do, we happily will lend HypnoCat and the Recycle Your Electricals campaign message for this, but we don't know what to tell people yet, frankly. So that's the difficulty. So if eventually we can get this clear message, and let's be hopeful, then definitely we will be out there trying to get as many people aware of it as possible. So, right, next we are going to move over to the Bicycle Association. So yeah, are you online? You're there, aren't you?
I am. Thank you very much, Scott. Yeah, and that's a perfect lead-in, actually, because what I think I'm going to mostly speak about is an industry voluntary scheme which involves retailer take back and proper disposal. Just before I start, though, I might just pick up on one of the earlier points about identifying reputable e-bike retailers and potentially brands. And just to say, it's still early days, but we have industry schemes to help consumers identify those reputable retailers. So one's called the e-bike positive retailer pledge. So that's a self-certification scheme at the moment, whereby retailers commit to only selling safe and legal e-bikes and only following proper OPSS and trading standards advice when repairing or doing conversions or anything like that. Yeah, if you just Google e-bike positive, you'll find that one. And the other thing we're doing is a kind of safety audit program to produce a quality mark for e-bike brands whose quality processes include all of the proper, testing to the international standards, full due diligence on supply quality and so on, which is carried out by many of the sort of household name brands who do produce very high quality e-bikes. Onto the collection and recycling. First, I'd say that certainly in my understanding, and I'm always fallible, but I see no grey area whatsoever between industrial and portable batteries when it comes to e-bikes. It's absolutely clear to me that they are all industrial, and that's written down in a government guidance note, which I'll attempt to place in the chat in a moment. It specifically mentions e-bikes as being in the industrial category, whatever the weight of the battery. So in our view, the take-back obligations do apply across the board. So every producer, and what's a producer is another question, does have that take-back obligation. And I think there's quite a sort of distinction here between now the reputable side of the industry, who are actually very keen to meet that take-back obligation, and some of the other suppliers who, either because they're from a distant country and selling online, as Giuseppe mentioned, may feel they can evade that responsibility. So as I think, my question mentioned, we have been running a pilot scheme for this national collection scheme. That was in the northeast of England with 50 retailers. It's been operated by ERP, I think it's one of the fairly well-known big companies who deal in waste and proper recycling and so on. And that's been running now since I think it was around about the end of last year, and it's given us some really good feedback. We've been providing proper containers with vermiculite for retailers to collect batteries. Then when they're full, that's collected by ERP and properly disposed of in either in the UK or perhaps they take it over to Germany for recycling. But yeah, it's been really good. I think the retailers have absolutely loved it. They love to get the batteries out of their premises ASAP and properly disposed of. This is actually in the course of doing this pilot, we've come to understand actually, as I think Robin has already mentioned in the comments, even before we get the industry scheme up and running, most of the responsible suppliers already have some sort of scheme in place to work with retailers. So it might be in the form of asking the retailers to properly dispose of a battery themselves, and then they get a credit from the producer to fund that disposal. Some producers organise their own collection, back to their central HQ, where they then organise proper disposal onwards. So just to say where we are with that, we have been looking to roll this out, from pilots to national, maybe with, up to 750 or so collection points through retailers. Some of the big retailer chains as well might be involved. We have letters of intent from around 50%, from companies representing about 50% of the kind of legitimate e-bikes placed on the market. Of course, what that doesn't include is suppliers of kits, individual components, and direct-to-consumer sales via the online marketplaces, which is slightly hard to quantify because it doesn't kind of hit our data systems, but is we think a very large part of the market, and particularly for the batteries which are problematic in safety terms. Okay, quickly, a second sort of big takeaway is that this has really evidenced that good e-bike batteries have a very long service life. So most of the batteries that have actually come back through this retailer scheme have been warranty failures or kind of early failures on that bathtub curve of failures you often get with products. Evidence from other countries and from some of the big suppliers suggests consumers often hang on to e-bike batteries perhaps longer than we'd like. It can be 8 to 10 years. It's an expensive item. They want to wring every iota of use out of it, even if they've only got, it's lost half its capacity, they'll still use it. So that means that actually we probably haven't come to the peak of battery disposal demand yet. The trajectory of e-bike sales in the UK, at least for legitimate ones, only kind of upticked really in 2019 to 2020. It's been kind of static at around 150,000 a year ever since. And it's actually fallen very slightly in the last few years. So if you kind of add that 8 to 10 years onto that 2019, 2020, it means in the next sort of 3 years or so, we would expect an uptick in the end of life batteries coming back to those retailers. I think the third point I would make, and I very much value the engagement from DEFRA here, but is that we are kind of waiting on a bit of regulatory certainty as to the next steps before we can really take this scheme forward, because the business model of any collection scheme really does depend on the regulatory framework, and it's not 100% clear whether in the sort of medium-ish term e-bike batteries will stay industrial. Will they move to something closer to portable, or would we align with the EU batteries regulation, which already applies in Northern Ireland, obviously, which classes them as light means of transport batteries with perhaps their own specific requirements. So I think there's still really good appetite in the industry for some kind of collection scheme. I would perhaps caution that it's almost it's important to do, but it's not going to solve the problem of batteries which don't come through the reputable industry. And those producers there is always a risk that they will simply free ride on the scheme, and we might not be able to, as an industry, afford to allow that to happen. So there would still need to be a good channel for consumers to take the batteries to perhaps municipal waste facilities, but I think we as an industry are also very aware that whichever disposal route exists has to be properly funded, and the kind of producer responsibility has to take account of those disposal costs. But we are keen that the producers who don't voluntarily do that are kind of forced to do so, perhaps via the online marketplaces, who could be made to take on that responsibility more easily. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Lots of interesting points. I think it shows as well even though they're very different, the sort of parallels between e-bike and e-scooters and vapes is that actually you've got these responsibilities that, okay, they're not perfect, but they're sort of there. But you have an industry that grows, and I guess, builds a culture where those costs and responsibilities are not really factored in. And what we've seen with vapes is that you manage to drag some producers in, but when they saw the actual costs of dealing with the challenges that their products are proposing and that they should be meeting, it's such a shock to them that they're then suddenly not doing it again because it costs them too much. And it's just an interesting thing that it's quite similar, although very different products, how you have an evolving market and how the regulations, not criticizing, but how can the regulations flex to new products coming onto the market that pose these challenges. And what vapes and e-bikes and e-scooters definitely do is pose some major challenges. It's self-evident. Great. So now local authorities, good segue into Chris from Devon County Council, and also represents Nordo, the Waste Disposal Officers group. Yeah, what's going on at the local authority level?
Well, I haven't had a chance to sort of survey widely yet, but obviously these batteries are emerging, in that we don't get too many of them as far as I'm aware, but they do come into our recycling centres. And as far as I can tell at the minute, they're just going with the normal batteries, probably incorrectly. But there is this confusion about, 4 kilos, over 4 kilos, all sorts of weird and wonderful batteries come in, from, little pill batteries to drill batteries and everything else. And so the public put them in the box. We can't then check every single battery as to whether that's a bike battery or a drill battery or a whatever. So the ones that do come in, they go off with the battery, the standard portable batteries. So that seems to be what's happening with them at the minute. But I say it would seem to be sensible just to reallocate these things as portable batteries. If you're a consumer, if you're a general member of the public, you think, well, this thing moves, it's on my bike. It's not too heavy. It's not like a whopping great. When you say industrial battery, you think of a huge, great thing. The public just think these are portable batteries and bring them along. So, yeah. And I think the other problem is if they are clarified as industrial batteries, and the sort of the law is clarified around that, if local authorities are having to put these things aside separately, are we then saying that you then have to contact the producer to arrange for disposal? Because there's not really any system set up for that. So you'll start to get this big problem piling up at recycling centres, whereby are producers servicing these sites to actually remove these batteries, or is it complete difficulty trying to get rid of them?
It's what we call it's interesting, it's what we call true life. It's like you create these things, and then actually how much information can consumers keep and want, and really they just it really is probably, from the vast majority of people, battery bin, or exactly. Put it in, and that's, I think, something we need to really not forget, because we can go into the detail and the weeds of whether it's this or that. But it's a battery. It's
a battery to the public. You want to make it as easy as possible. There's a battery box over there, So that to me is the way forward. It was interesting listening to Monica earlier about the damaged batteries, because we do get the odd call about this, and it would be very useful to have some sort of central guidance as to what the hell you do with a ballooning battery.
I'd agree. We have been trying to get that for 5 years, and I think we had a real experience where we were contacting somebody, as you know, we're material focus and recycle your electricals. We were contacting somebody as material focus, and they advised us to, maybe you should speak to recycle your electricals. They probably know. So we went, it's a full circle economy. That's the circular economy. We came full circle to ourselves. So yeah, I think that's a good objective for this work, is to get some real clarity as to what we can tell the public to do with those types. Leads now to sort of go to the Environmental Services Association, and Jacob's joined us from there. The ESA is where a lot of the private waste management companies meet to discuss issues of common interest. And of course, an issue for the Veolias and the DEFRAs and the Suezes of this world is this increasing challenge posed by battery-related fires. So Jacob, thanks for joining today.
Brilliant. No, thank you for the invite, Scott. And afternoon, everybody. I mean, I think our perspective, we share a lot of, and I'd agree with a lot of what's already been said, really. Like you rightly say, Scott, the increasing prevalence of fires, and Darren mentioned earlier, you get fires on trucks, fires at recycling centres, and so forth. It's pushing up insurance costs. We think it's costing our members, over £1 billion a year now in waste fires. Increasing amount of those coming from are battery related. And I think the key for us is, having those properly funded routes to disposal. I would agree with Peter in terms of, we think that these, according to the categorization, they look like industrial batteries. There should be producer obligations on that. Was it last year? I lose track of time. Was it last year that DEFRA consulted on the WEEE regs? They were going to consult on the battery regs after that, and when it came to the waste electricals, they were talking about moving the point of compliance to the doorstep, which we would support. And it'd be great if, the same could happen for these sorts of, if that could be consulted on for these sorts of batteries. But then you need to capture the online marketplaces that, they just announced that they're doing on the waste electricals front. And it's good to hear about some of the good practice and the pilots that Peter's trying to put into place, but that needs to be widespread. It needs to be universal, and it needs to be simple. Like you say, Scott, there needs to be really simple messages to consumers. Need to think about, picking up some of Chris's points, the route via HWRCs, via municipal recycling centres. Got to make sure that people have access to these sorts of options and routes. But then even if they get to the HWRC, they've got to go in the right container. We get a lot of issues where people just pitch up and they just sling it in the first skip they see, sort of thing. So in a few years ago, we were trying to look at some potential like technical interventions that could be made using AI and visual recognition type stuff to try and actually intervene and stop these things getting into the wrong container. Because once that happens, then that's where all the problems arise. So, I would echo the points that Peter made around regulatory certainty. We need clear funded routes to disposal, and it needs to be really simple for consumers. And that's where we're coming from.
Thanks, Jacob. Right, there are organisations who do process industrial batteries in the UK, and we're going to hear from one of those now. EMR, thanks for joining us, Mike. How are industrial batteries being handled and processed at the moment? And do we think that same process could be applied to e-bike batteries, or do they, pose different sort of challenges?
Thanks for inviting us, Scott, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll defer to Helen Waters on the battery processing, but just picking up from Jacob's point there, we did look a couple of years ago. We're trying to put some interventions in, because the single biggest challenge to the recycling sector is that these batteries tend to go in the wrong places, and that's why we're having these fires. In recycling infrastructure, whether that's on the road in a vehicle or in a bin or in a skip or at a recycling facility. But also, we talk about battery segregation and putting the batteries in a bin. Most members of the public won't remove the battery from the device it's attached to. So whether that's an e-bike, scooter, tool, whatever. So it's educating users, and maybe looking at what the EU are doing on battery passports for automotive, and maybe following that in portable batteries by putting some guidance actually on the batteries as well as the assets, so that you can scan a QR code and get some very clear guidance, and on a landing page that will help the user understand exactly what they can do and where that can go to. I think that the biggest challenge for us is that if we don't see it, it ends up covered in another material, and then that's where the fires begin. Yeah, and I think it's got to be funded by the producers and the retailers, really, depending on what the categorization is, and maybe even having a look at the EWC classification of these objects, but separating them from general WEEE might cause the industry to be able to have a separate process for these, because they shouldn't really be treated in the same way as general WEEE. They're more like vehicles with different challenges, and probably closer to electric vehicles in that respect.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Helen. Yes, Helen.
Hi there. Yeah, so I head up our battery centre for EMR, and are looking at we've been running a project really looking at that circular economy of the electric vehicles. What I would say is everything's the same for scooters and those batteries. There is no difference. The only thing that's different is the chemistry of the batteries. We as sort of battery recycling now are very keen to start some of these conversations. I've written down so many names here that I'd love to talk to you afterwards, because I think there's a lot we can do, both in terms of the battery safety, some of the fire stuff that we've learned as we've gone along there. And, there is no difference in how you handle that battery. It's just the size. That's the only difference. Everything else should be the same. How you process that battery when you've received it as a recycler is that you should be able to test it. You should be able to know the state of health of it. You should be able to know how much charge it's got in. You should be making that safe for its next onward journey. Whether that onward journey be to a shredder in the UK to turn that into black mass, to start to put it back into the market, or whether alternatively you're doing that shredding yourself, whichever way you do it, you've got to be able to discharge that. So having facilities like we have is crucial to making that work. We're very open to having discussions about compliance schemes. Some things work on the portable batteries things, some things don't. Let's start with a new piece of paper and start to look at how we do that. Peter, I'm really interested in the fact that you've already started that, and I think as a big metal recycler, we should be able to help, particularly on the fact that we've got 60 ATFs across the UK. There's all sorts of things that we can do to kind of improve this process. And for me, it's about making that consumer really aware of what they've got, but I think the press and things that are in there do that already. They're probably a bit scared of them. The other piece is we shouldn't underestimate how much the people like the Met Police and things are seeing some of these things. So having somebody from them in this round table, I think would be really interesting, because they're seeing them as the new getaway vehicles and things like that. So they're the sorts of challenges that we have. I think the other thing as well is that a lot of these things will get sorted out in terms of, it's really difficult at the moment because every battery that gets recycled has moreover got a negative value, which drives the wrong behaviour for the consumer, because they think they've got to pay to get rid of it. And actually, if you adopt the same principle as the automotive schemes have, which is it's the producer that's responsible for that, and the recycler can then claim their fees back until things turn into positive, and then you share that value. That's the sorts of things we've got to look at with the e-scooters piece as well. I agree with what's been said about it. Really confused me when somebody told me that it was WEEE. I don't have a battery background. I come from cars, so anything that's got a motor in it or something like that, I completely accept that it's automotive. So when somebody said to me it was WEEE, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. If I don't understand that and I'm in the industry, guess what? I bet customers don't understand that either. So it's really about trying to educate. And what we see a lot of it is it's made a little difficult in terms of how you accept that in. So to give an example, I did my lovely battery centre, and it's no secret that we didn't even think about the e-scooter having a different EWC code to everything else. And if I didn't see that, others will as well. So it's about that piece around make it as easy as possible. I know that the battery regulations will cover this off. My view is, and I sit in the battery task force for the government. I don't hear anything saying differently that they won't be following the EU. We've taken that approach in that guidance is there already. 99% sure most of it will go through. That's how we're building our processes. So it will become easier to be able to identify these, and it won't necessarily just go on weight, and then we can take it from there. So I guess my point here is it's exactly the same. The only difference is they're smaller, and we just need to make sure we put the same principles and processes in like we're doing with EV batteries.
Thank you, guys. And now we've got to talk about the issue that I think Jacob mentioned, maybe somebody else did, is around insurance and the impact that this changing risk profile is having on the insurance of everybody across the sector. So we've got Paul and Stacey from Zurich. I'm not sure which one of you is speaking, but again, as I have with everybody else, welcome. Thanks for contributing today. Over to you.
No problem. I'll speak first, and Stacey can jump in. Probably, I don't think you'll be surprised that the biggest challenge we're facing, I think we've all mentioned it on the call, is the disposal of the batteries and the problems the disposal is causing. We're seeing a lot of fires with regards to the disposal of the batteries, and it's just going into general landfill sites. These fires are not small fires when they do occur. They are large, they are complex, they are really expensive. And probably when the end consumer doesn't know about the batteries, so they're just putting them in general, so we can't really blame them with regards to it, but it is creating large fires. The problems from the insurance point of view, obviously it's an increased risk for ourselves with regards to the e-bikes and the readily availability of these, which will result in potential higher premiums. You're going to look at wider businesses who do point out that they've got these e-bikes or whatever. There is going to be coverage restrictions to these e-bikes. Obviously, safety checks need to be done for compliance, etc. But there is a massive impact that is occurring. But the general problem we are seeing is the disposal of the batteries themselves and the problems that creates when an incident does occur across the board. But policy terms wise, the likelihood is they will be getting tighter with regards to the purchase of e-bikes. Your general consumer, it's hard to tell because you don't need to declare that within a policy, but wider businesses, there will be tighter probably restrictions with regards to it. But I don't know if there's anything, Stacey, you want to add further with regards to what I've said.
Thanks, Paul. I think I'd agree first and foremost that the main issue that we're facing is disposal, and particularly disposal of partially burnt, damaged, volatile batteries mixed in with building debris, which makes it a little bit more complicated than disposing an undamaged recycled battery, for example. One loss in particular that is very, very significant in terms of value at the moment. We're trying to work out how to safely remove, transport and dispose of approximately 800 tons worth of partially burnt batteries mixed into a building which needs to be demolished. And needless to say, that's causing quite a lot of layers of complexity in terms of how we achieve that. It then naturally elongates the reinstatement of the property. So for a typical large event, we would expect from start to finish mitigation, demolition and reinstatement of a building to take circa 2 years, anything up to 2 years. In this particular example that I'm talking about, we're being advised that potentially due to a combination of license restrictions in terms of just the volume of batteries and the companies that can do the disposal and the volatility of the batteries on site, that just sorting and safely transporting and disposing of those batteries will take approximately 2 years. So that's 4 years before the building is complete, as an example. I suppose the extent of the damage is exacerbated just because of the type of fire, the ferocity of the fire. A loss that I've seen this morning mentions that one of our warehouses took 4 days to extinguish. So in comparison to a battery, non-battery fire, the extent of the damage is exacerbated. I'm sure everybody on this call is well aware of that. Contamination is another big problem from a consumer consumer, business, local authority, and obviously insurance policy perspective in terms of not just air pollution, but water, surrounding land, both on our site and to neighbours, which brings with it, you know, the increased risk of liability losses against insurers, against policyholders, on top of the damage that they have to deal with. And then the volatility, we've had instances, multiple instances, where fires have reignited either spontaneously or during attempted cleanup. So leading back to ultimately that point of safe debris removal in our instances, safe disposal, safe transportation, we need ultimately something that works for that just as much as the general BAU disposal. You're on mute, Scott.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stacey and Paul. And thank you for telling me I was on mute. I think it's fair to say the reason we are here together today is pretty obvious, because there's an awful lot of, let's say, challenges and hopefully some opportunities ahead of us. That ends the sort of structured bit of this. So we've been running a Q&A. My tech is still being a bit wobbly, so I can't actually see it. Someone's sending me the Q&A, but I'm just going to go and find some of the questions, and then I'll direct them to the relevant people. Interesting question. Are the fire services in the UK equipped with lithium-specific fire extinguishers? In Ireland, we are working with, not we in the context of the person asking this question, we are working with the Chief Fire Officers Association to raise awareness of best practice and equipment available for waste lithium batteries. So yeah, either Monica or Darren, do you have specific equipment, and is it readily available?
I'm not aware that that is something that's really been investigated within NFCC. So I think our operational colleagues within NFCC would be interested in that work to potentially see if it could benefit the UK Fire and Rescue Service. I don't know if Darren wants to come in from a more operational point of view there.
So it's one of those things where if you do searches on the internet, you'll find there's loads and loads of research been done out there, loads and loads of people that come up with, we've got the solution. Unfortunately, some of the solutions, whilst they initially may look good, when you look at the bigger picture of, firstly, sometimes the initial risk you're putting firefighters to actually initiate and use that equipment, and then the further risk that it's creating further down the line, and potential environmental impacts and everything else, that at the moment there isn't a solution. And this is one of the big problems we're having with lithium-ion batteries, more with electric cars than things like bikes and scooters, because you're looking at a much bigger scale of battery. And at the moment, there is just no simple answer. And the other issue that was mentioned by Stacey that is another problem that we see is the reignition of batteries. So it's all very well that you extinguish a battery like a car battery, but actually, in some ways, by extinguishing it, you're creating another problem, because now you've got a dangerous, unsafe battery. So in some ways, there's a lot of argument to say protect any risk around it and let it burn, which that in itself is an environmental impact, but it actually then makes it safe. So there's a lot of challenges around the firefighting aspect of it. And at the moment, unfortunately, there are no simple answers. If other countries have come up with stuff, then certainly we'd be interested in looking at that ourselves, and I'm sure that NFCC would certainly be interested in that as well.
I think as part of the Recovas project that we did as well, which was part of that, was the health and safety aspect. And we found just the same, Darren, there is no one size fits all. What we've had to do is to build a facility that does our best and does it to the best standard that we think is appropriate based on what we know about the rest of the fire risks that we have in our business. What we did do is engage with our local fire brigade though, and recently we've had a fire not a big one, thank goodness, and one that was contained very quickly. But I have to say, the Birmingham Fire Service were absolutely amazing. And what they did was worked with us because they knew that we knew about those batteries. So our guy got on site and it was a very, very controlled situation. It could have been so very different. So I think each one is very different, isn't it? And each set of circumstances is very different. I also have a friend that works in the fire brigade, and he said exactly the same as what you've just said, is that there's no safe way to do it. So actually you're protecting people, not assets at that point. And I know the insurers won't necessarily want to hear that, but that is the case. It has to be, doesn't it? Until there are relevant solutions. What there is, though, is a lot of things that can be done, particularly in buildings, to help secure that. So, for example, and again, I'm not suggesting for any minute we've got it fully right because we're still learning, but there's thermal imaging, there's gas detection, there's proper fire suppressant systems and all those sorts of things. There's fire blankets. All of those things were deployed and saved our building. So there's lots of different things, isn't there, in lots of different environments. And the things that we're talking about today in e-scooters is no different, is it? Perhaps when you've got a set of flats, it could be legislation that if an e-scooter is in there, it has to be in a secure fire-locked building. There's a container that's in the cupboard, so it's a bit like a garage, but you're protecting it. And I'm just making that up as I go along, but you know, there's all sorts of different things, isn't there, that you could be creative of. Yes, you've still got the point that somebody's got to use that, but you can start to think about each of the different sets of circumstances, and there is no one size fits all.
Thanks, guys. That's go on, Monica.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's a good point, particularly thinking about flats and that kind of thing, although from a fire point of view, you know, it's not always that straightforward. You know, fire and rescue services, even though there might be statutory consultees in relation to building regs, sometimes what fire services have to say in order to protect that built environment, for example, and the people within it, is not always what people want to hear. So they're not always listened to. And I don't know if LFB want to make a comment there.
No, I think you've covered it, to be honest.
I think it's I think there's a sort of a parallel maybe to climate change as well, where you sort of have the prevent climate change and adapt to climate change, and sometimes they seem to argue with each other, where actually the reality is we need both, you know. And I think this is the case certainly when we've looked at hidden batteries, what we call hidden batteries around all electricals. Is this what does success look like? Because if you're preventing fires, you'll never know that you might never know that you've prevented them. So it's something we've played around with and thinking about how you frame it, but we've just got to be pragmatic here as well, in that this is about, you know, adapting all behaviors, not just the consumer behaviors, but how we all handle and move and think about lithium-ion batteries and respect, I guess, the powerful punch that they can deliver if handled incorrectly. Right. Question around sort of classification. It was said that if over 4 kilos, then these batteries are industrial, scooter batteries are industrial. Is there an implication, therefore, that if they're below 4 kilos, then they are portable? I don't know who's best to answer that. Maybe James, is that something for DEFRA?
Happy to take it, Scott. I think Peter very kindly chucked a link in the chat higher up as well. But the regulations are fairly clear that a battery that's used to drive an electric vehicle is an industrial battery, and that's regardless of how much it weighs.
Okay. So almost that's a bit of a red herring of the conversation that seems to be out. People seem to be having that conversation, but in fact, the regulations are pretty clear that if it's in a vehicle, then it's if it's in a EV, then it's industrial. Okay.
But right. There's a bit of a conflict there, though, with EWC classification, though, isn't it, James? With if it's classed as WE, then you end up in WE, and it'll be dealt with by WE instead of being dealt with under battery protocol.
Thanks, Mike. We understand there is an aspect of classification and coding that interacts potentially with that. I think we've been discussing it only today, and happy to have a further discussion about it because it's complex. but noted that is something that is also in the mix and can potentially add to the confusion within the system.
Just a comment from, rather than a question, a comment from the Graham Vickery of the WE team at DEFRA. The WE regs are clear that e-bikes not being subject to type approval are within the scope of WE. As part of WE treatment requirements, all batteries must be removed for further treatment. Best practices for the WE recycler to then separate portable and industrial to go down the treatment routes as classified from there. Just a point of clarification. This always comes up with, it's come up a lot with vapes, and government recently announced that they are going to implement a deposit return scheme for certain packaging in future years. But is this an area that could benefit from something like a specific industry deposit return scheme? Jacob, I'm going to pick you to answer that.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I mean, certainly it's an area. So in the past, we as ESA have called for a deposit return scheme type system on batteries. We've focused in the past about portable batteries, but it'd be equally applicable to this sort of area. But when we've sort of had some of the discussions, some of the conversations with battery producers and retailers and others, it's not like with the drinks container scheme where it's very fast moving and you get your deposit back within a matter of days or weeks or whatever. These things, I mean, Peter was talking earlier about a 10-year lifespan on some of these things. So that instantly creates a challenge around how you distribute the sort of the obligation, as it were. But I mean, from our perspective, we sort of feel something needs to be done to move the dial, because it's just lithium battery fires. It's an exponentially increasing problem. It's a massive issue for the recycling industry, and we would really need to see some sorts of intervention to increase those routes to disposal, increase that consumer awareness and all the rest of it, to try and get these things into the right stream and out of the wrong stream. And that's just what's critical to us.
Yeah, and it all comes at a cost as well, Scott. So whether we're segregating a source at the doorstep or segregating a return scheme or segregating a recycling facility, whether that be a local centre or a processor, there all comes with the cost of intercepting that material and segregating it from general waste, from metal waste, and from other WE perhaps as well.
Yeah, and I think we all know that it's not insignificant cost that we're talking about either. So but that can't be a reason for inaction as well, obviously, because
absolutely, yeah,
having the consequences, and it's the wrong people. The people who are cleaning up the mess are being put out of pocket in lay person's language. I've been informed, Chris Chandler, you had your hand up, so I couldn't see you, but if you're there and you have something to say, you're more than welcome.
I was just going back on the classification system, because it's just if these things are, well, it'd be useful to have some clarification around e-bikes, because if they are classed as electric vehicles and how that interrelates with the EWC codes, you're sort of then moving them away from them being household waste. And if they're not household waste, local councils don't necessarily have to deal with them or provide facilities. So it's that sort of, you need to be careful around how this is interpreted as well.
Okay. Just to clarify again, I think we were clear at the start, this is being recorded. Someone keeps asking in the chat whether it's being recorded. It is being recorded and will be made available. James, you had a hand and then you disappeared again. What happened? You got shy?
A lot of things were moving on. And I got halfway through writing the same thing in the chat. Chris and Mike, if we could have a follow-up discussion on that particular point, that would be welcome.
Great. I was wondering, do you know, just the economics of this? What is the maybe Peter, you can answer this. What's the difference between the sort of cost of a entry level e-bike and e-scooter and the sort of top end ones? What differences are we looking at in terms of cost?
Well, yeah, happy to go at that. I think if you're looking at kind of the sort of thing we might recommend you buy, which would be a high street retailer product, and I don't know if I can probably mention names, can't I? If you wander into Halfords, you buy their cheapest e-bike, it's going to be £500-600, and it will be safe. I think I can make a fairly strong statement. It will be safe. I know the Halfords guys, and they do their compliance very carefully. If you want to spend more, you can spend a lot more. You can get a very good kind of mid-range bike for £1,500 e-bike. Maybe it would have a motor system and battery made by Bosch, who are obviously a household name, do lots of stuff. If you want to spend a lot more, you can go way up into the £5,000, £8,000, £10,000 if you really get keen. That's kind of almost neither here nor there for this discussion, I suppose. The difficulty is that if instead you want the cheapest possible e-bike to make food deliveries, you can go onto eBay, Alibaba, Temu, any of these places, and you can get a conversion kit for 150, 200 quid. And you can buy a second-hand bike for 25 quid down your local disreputable hangout, and you can cobble one onto the other, and you've got an e-bike which is very questionable in all sorts of ways. It's probably not even legal, because those kits can be sold which exceed the speed limits for a road legal e-bike and the power limits. As Giuseppe expressed as well, you may not be buying a complete kit. Maybe you'll be buying separate components from different vendors. How do you know they're compatible? How do you know any kind of quality processes in place to secure they're actually what they say they are? They often put they put the CE mark on the listing on eBay or wherever it may be, but that's not credible. So it's very difficult for consumers. I think we think actually it is worth distinguishing a little bit between the large level of demands driven by the gig economy and the number of kind of what you might call normal consumers who would go down the cobble together a kit route. I think there are some hobbyists who kind of enjoy that kind of endeavour, but we do think that a very large portion of the demand for these dodgy, very low-priced kits is from that gig economy sector because of the structural incentives which apply to riders. We don't want to blame the riders. It needs a root and branch reform, and we've got various proposals how that might be done for that sector.
Thank you. Just reflecting on the deposit return scheme idea as well, is that because of the long life cycle of these products, it's slightly different than, as Jacob said, the fast moving consumer goods is, the deposit is sitting somewhere, could be for a very, very long time. Businesses may not exist anymore at the end of life and all those other factors. And we've seen similar with the solar industry, in that you've had spikes in, solar panels being put in, and then big troughs, often driven by government intervention. But the people who are now left selling, there's very few companies now currently selling solar panels who originated 20 years ago when they were installed. So, there is some pragmatism in the waste electrical system, which is around those who are operating and profiting now are paying for old stuff that is coming back. They're not paying for their own stuff coming back. So you have this concept of individual producer responsibility, which seems to be sort of there for industrial. But in reality, it is incredibly difficult to actually implement it, and arguably not cost efficient or environmentally efficient to do it as well. So that's sort of in the mix. Helen, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, I'm just going to say as well, I think what's also clear to me is that definition of e-bike and e-scooter, because there's some very big differences between the two, isn't there? The size of the batteries, for example, in a scooter is much bigger than it is in a bike. So there's probably some education we could do around that, particularly when you're taking those batteries back and taking those things back into schemes, just as a comment, really.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
It was just a couple of points that were made with regards to...
Oh, we can't quite hear you.
You hear me now?
No.
No?
It's just very quiet. No, the gremlins have arrived. The gremlins have arrived.
So just a couple of points. The consumer with regards to waste disposal. So the waste disposal, it does generally go into general landfill.
Sorry, Paul. Paul, it's not working at all. It's not working. But do you want to put it in the chat, and then I'll get to it. Sorry about that. Actually, most of the questions are done. Is there anyone who's on the panel who wants to raise any sort of comments or points? We know Paul does, so I'm filling here until Paul actually writes the chat. So, but if anybody else could help me out and bail me out and say something of interest, that would be great. Volunteers are very welcome.
Scott, and I guess, there's one thing we're kind of missing from all this discussion as well. I mean, most of this conversation is about the risk and how we manage the risk and who pays for the risk and then the recycling. But what we've got is, tens of thousands of tons of critical raw material sitting in the UK, whether that's copper, aluminium, whether it's rare earths, which are costly to recover at the moment, but there's all that material that's kind of being lost as well. So there's the reducing the risk element, but there's also the maximizing circularity and getting all this material back into use and avoiding that from going down the wrong routes. So there's kind of another angle, to try and encourage sort of correct end of life use, I suppose.
Great, very good point, of course, and one we think about a lot, as you know. There was a question on the chat around whether the conversion units were covered by WEEE regulations or not. Anybody have a definitive answer on that? I'm just trying to read the chat now. Okay, no, I can't follow it.
No, Scott, it's Natalie. Hi from DEFRA. We've just been having a bit of a discussion in the chat, and I think the answer is no, we don't have a definitive answer, especially as people have been talking about if the kits are sold in different chunks and if the battery is sold separately, then that would still fall under the battery's regs. So there's probably a bit of difference depending on how exactly that kit is formulated potentially. So that might be something that we need to just look into in a bit more detail.
Okay. Paul, have you managed to put your thing in yet? Hey, we filled in. Perfect. In respect of waste disposal, rather than deposit return, do we offer incentives to dispose of batteries correctly rather than just placed into general waste? This is something that we front and center of our minds when we were setting up the Recycle Your Electricals campaign is how do you incentivize people to do something that they're currently not doing? And there's ways that you can do that through communication and psychology and emotion. There's way if you combine that with making it easier as well, and then sort of tug at the tug or nudge, and hopefully that people will see it's the right thing to do. But it's fair to say that in circumstances, incentives, often financial incentives, can drive behaviour. The problem you have is that they need to be long term. So if you just come in and drop an incentive in for 3 months, everyone will get really attracted by it. But if that money disappears, if it's a financial one, then suddenly that behaviour will almost return to normal in most circumstances. But I think it's something that merits looking at, because I think you could offer incentives in different ways. I've been fascinated. I don't know if anyone's followed the Omaze house draws that are now very popular, which is basically a lottery, and in a way could take back somehow. If you can identify, also you have GDPR concerns about people, but if people did a certain thing and almost fell into something like that, the Amaze type vibe. So basically you're in the draw for something that's pretty attractive, could that be a way of incentivizing people that maybe spreads the load? Because also as well, if you're incentivizing, it's financial, somebody's got to pay for that. Okay, it's easy to say that the producers will pay for that, but ultimately it's the consumers who pay for it because the producer cost will pass through. But I think it's a really interesting point. Right, I am looking on very different things. Question from Peter, who's on the panel. Could online marketplaces, online marketplace sellers even realistically be forced to collect deposits for the products that they sell? Very, very good point as well. On online marketplaces, I'm not sure we've touched a lot on them today in relation to the fact that new regulations on online marketplaces are coming for waste electricals, which is now putting the onus on those who them to essentially become a quasi-producer and register their sales. James, and again, not to challenge not deliberately a challenging question. Have you guys thought about putting a similar thing in place for batteries going forwards or not?
Thanks, Scott. I think that question is one for the bigger bunch of questions that sit within the longer term. What happens in future regulation and potential reforms to those? So, absolutely, the role of online marketplaces in bringing batteries onto the UK market is really important, and the taking of responsibility for those when they become waste and how they're obligated within that system. It's definitely something that I suppose we try to keep separate from the discussions today as something in the basket of possibilities for longer term solutions.
Great. Giuseppe, I believe you've got your hand up. Are you trying to find unmute there, Giuseppe?
Yeah,
I can't tell from your face.
Right, it was actually on the previous point to do with like consumer behavior, and we feel quite a lot of it is people will do the right thing if they know what they're supposed to do. So there's quite a lot here about like education of consumers and actually marking of products so that they know what they're supposed to do with the products at the end of life. I think a lot of consumers actually don't know, what do I do with this? So it's much easier just to throw it into the normal waste than to do the right thing. And I feel that if the right education is out there and the right marking is on the products telling people what they need to do with these, I think consumers in the whole will do the right thing and will recycle these products in the right way.
There you go, Giuseppe, with a hope bomb thrown in the mix. Good. Stacey. This is a test of how quickly people are going to mute themselves. It's become suddenly. No, I don't think you're good.
So I've got two completely unrelated questions. So the first being in terms of recycling and recycling behaviours, has there been any consideration or thought given to the current waste disposal that we have at the moment? So we've got general waste and we've got, for example, your food waste and your boxes and your recycling. Is there something that's missing within that process for disposal of batteries? So that's one question. And then the other one is probably for maybe Helen, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, Helen, but going back to my very real diabolical situation with hundreds of tons of batteries that are damaged, volatile, and mixed in with a building. What are the options in terms of dealing with that level of disposal on such a big scale? So whoever answers first, that's just two completely separate questions. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thinking out loud.
I can answer the first one, I think. So we are about to do. We're doing some analysis now, which is basically we're looking at the UK, all of the UK, and how is it performing in relation to how does each local authority perform in relation to collecting waste electricals and portable batteries. And we're doing lots of different analysis with that, and what's the driver for different, is there a driver for difference? Is it availability? Is it accessibility? Is it socioeconomic factors? Or is it all of the above? As part of that, we discovered the 100 or so, basically there's around about 100 local authorities who do curbside for batteries or both. And so we're looking at that as a factor too, to say, if you have a curbside collection, does it do anything? Does it mean that you're collecting more batteries and therefore ergo potentially reducing risk because it's going to the professional recycler rather than onto the bin lorry and being crushed? So we're starting to look at all of that now. With portable batteries, you've got the issue is that, trying to say this, I might accidentally be rude, but I'm not trying to be. But changing these batteries from industrial to portable, the portable battery system is a mess too. So it's not like it's a savior to come in and save the day, because we've had very skewed lead acid protocol driven compliance in portable batteries. So yeah, over to the team at DEFRA. I know we're looking at these things, but yeah, there's challenges in lots of spaces. I'll stop talking now. Helen.
Yeah, I'll just carry on with that bit for just a second as well. I think you're right. I think what we're doing is it's kind of some of the things that are happening in EV batteries are filtering into the portable world because they just will naturally. So there's not really been full disposal routes, that's all I'll say, on the portable batteries because of the way the schemes were written. Those pieces will now fall into the same disposal categories as EV batteries will because they're similar chemistries. So if anything, it will help. I think there's also lots being done around vapes and the portable waste anyway. I'm with Mike though, on the e-scooters and e-bikes, moreover, they'll be disposed of as wholes, not separate. So you'll get the whole thing, which makes it easier. And the reason they'll do that, particularly in the early days, is because there'll be value in the metal, but not in the battery, and it might negate the two. So the right behaviour will be driven by the fact that if they weigh it in as a whole, it'll help. In terms of in terms of the piece around construction, let's talk, okay? Because no, there isn't any solution. But I think what we need are some of those solutions. And what we started in EMR is something that looks at the disposal route. I've got this whole thing around damaged cars as well, the same principle attack. If we can fix some of that stuff, it will then go over to cross sector into all the other stuff that needs fixing as well. So yeah, come and talk to us. We'll be delighted, because I think there's EMR's already got a big construction team that work in industry anyway. They work with insurers on decommissioning sites, whether that because there's been an insurance claim, whether that's just because they're taking the building down. I can give you a few more examples of energy storage systems that we've got stuck together that I don't know what to do with yet. We will find all of those solutions. They're not there today. And what I would say is other countries haven't found those solutions either, for lots of different reasons. And one of the biggest reasons that you can't find a solution in the UK simply is because we don't have a big incinerator. So other countries, their opportunities, now that's not right from an environmental piece, but that's what they do with them, is they get their big massive incinerators because they're a much bigger scale than the UK are, and they chuck them in there. That's not an option for us, so we have to find different solutions for all of that. So please come talk to us.
Okay, great. New friendships.
I know.
One in France and one here, so there you go.
Can't quite hear you, Stacey. I think Microsoft Teams has got something against Zurich, it seems. But no, what's really good is you're seeing new connections being made, which is sort of why we wanted to do this. I've got one final question, and then I'll do a summary. The question is being sent to me from a friend, Justin, who is a recycler in Kent, although you're all my friends, of course. Do producers not have to pay for e-bike / scooter batteries? I think I think if they're industrial batteries, then if on a like-for-like basis, that obligation exists. But I think we're saying that practically, who's going to check their old battery and contact the individual producer for collection? But I don't know if somebody from DEFRA might want to correct me, because I might just be false thinking there. No, are you leaving me hanging? That's not fair, DEFRA.
I think, thanks, Scott. I think I probably want to give the answer to that question just a little bit more further thought before trying my hand at answering it, if that's okay.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, we can do that in the follow-up. So those who joined early will know that we had some technical issues before this commenced, and I still can't see the screen. Can somebody just put a thumbs up if there's a slide on there at the moment? Excellent. And let's hope it's the right slide. So yeah, closing remarks. But firstly, of course, thank you to everybody who contributed today. Thank you to those who listened from home or from work, of course. Thank you internally to Neve McBride and Vanessa Gibbon for all their help in getting all of this together. And we just wanted to sort of leave you with an understanding that this is not the end. We want to get something out of this that's substantial. We think it will take time, but we're here to sort of facilitate these sort of discussions. So we plan to produce an industry briefing paper on e-bike and e-scooters similar to the ones that we've had. We will use all we're finding out here to inform our campaign messaging and what consumers need to do. Although I think, let's be frank, we're quite away from that at the moment. And what's clear is that there's this question mark around, is there voluntary action that the different stakeholders could embark on? Because we know that the regulatory train is not a quick one, and that's quite expected to be. Writing legislation that works is not easy. It's not a quick job. But are there things that we can do together in the meantime that can help inform that, help frame it, and indeed help the regulation be the right regulations? Because it's easy to quickly rush to solve a solution and not really have factored all the things in. So experience of trying to manage this will be really important. And then we're also looking at, hopefully this was a success. I can't see any of your faces, but I thought this worked pretty well. So I think we've got something to build on for other issues. And coming up, we want to look at hidden batteries in general. So that's the bigger challenge of batteries inside electricals. E-textiles has battery aspects to it, but it's a growing challenge. There's a lot more apparel now for sale with bits of wires and batteries integrated into them for lots of different reasons, from health through to medical reasons. So can we get ahead of that? We don't want another vapes, that is for sure. And also that work I mentioned earlier around curbside and other public collections. We'll be making that analysis available, and we'll give it to stakeholders and have the debate in the open about what the best way of keeping batteries out of bins really is in time for any future legislation. So I have given you 12 minutes back of your time. Use it wisely. I hope you had a good experience today. You've learned a lot. I've certainly learned a lot. This is a big issue, that's for sure. A lot of challenges ahead, but let's go with Giuseppe's hope bomb that he put in about the fact that if we can make it easy there, and I do support it. I think if we can make it easy and we can have a simple message, then we can, not maybe everybody, but we can get a lot more people engaging. So that's where we want to go. I hope we can get there pretty soon. But yeah, thanks everybody. Take care. Have a good rest of the week.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Scott and the team for organising.